Welcome to Rebecca Sounds Reveille. This is going to be a very different kind of show and very exciting at that because many of you may be history buffs or, well, even a little bit medieval buffs. With me today, my guest is Anne, well, she is an assistant professor of English and medieval literature at Linwood University. She's also been featured in a magazine, Longwood Magazine, as a matter of fact, and she specializes in the medieval of a lot of different types of emphasis. I'm going to let her share all of them with you because it's not just one. There's actually many, to include specific types such as women's and gender studies. Even more so, she has specified things of interdisciplinary and comparative literary and historian type of criticism, critic type of things. And she is not only doing things in the form of teaching, but she has publications behind her belt as well. In fact, so many so that I really couldn't list all of them in my opening remarks, and I really would like to. I was amazed when I was doing my research on her because I thought, this is really quite unbelievable, and it's going to take me a lot to get through it. There's absolutely no way. She's also an author. We're going to talk about a book that she has coming out, but not only that, she's got additional research projects that are coming out and even more things that I'm going to bring out in our conversation. With me today, I just cannot wait to introduce Dr. Melissa Ridley Elmes. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm excited too. I really have a lot of questions for you because when I was doing my research, I was really amazed at some of the things that interest you that really that aligned with the things that I do on my show. And one of them that really caught my attention was the range that you have and also the focus that you have. One of them being, let me stop right there first. My background with helping people with domestic violence and overcoming trauma is a big focus of mine. It is the whole crux of what started me in radio and then on to doing television. And what really just perked my interest and really got me more involved in researching you and the things that you did was your focus on violence and trauma in the medieval literature. Can you tell me how you really went that route as well?
Well, it's a little bit of a roundabout answer. As an undergraduate at William and Mary College, I was fortunate to be part of the Avalon domestic violence shelter. I did 80 hours of training to serve as a volunteer for the shelter. I worked their hotline. And so that kind of was the start of, I grew up in a very almost tragically standard American household. Two parents who loved each other their entire life, a sister, a dog, a house. We didn't have that kind of experience in my personal background. And it was really eye-opening. And I think it kind of set the stage for I'm just realizing this as I'm talking about it. I forgot all about it. But I think that really started my interest in thinking through questions of trauma and questions of violence and intersections of trauma, violence, class, race, gender. I do a lot of work with that in my teaching, especially in my composition courses, but I do a lot of it in my lit classes too. And it didn't, I always thought, because when I went back for graduate school, I went to Longwood University and worked with Kat Tracy, whom we affectionately call the torture queen, because her expertise is torture, violence, brutality. And I always thought it was just because she was awesome and I trained with her. But I think there were affinities there before that I didn't even think about, that kind of led me to be very attracted to the work that she was doing. So yeah, that's oh I love having like self-awareness happening.
Yes. I will tell you, it just really jumped off the page at me, and not just once. This was something that struck me, because not only was like your self-awareness now, it was self-awareness to me of the historical value in time, because my thought has always been on the biblical side, in thinking, okay, Cain and Abel, da 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 da, lineage, but not in the historical sense of medieval times, or in specific sects of time. And for those of you listening, that's SECTX. So this was an eye-opener for me, and it just kept coming back. And even as I'm doing more and more research, I just kept coming back to this. And I thought, wow, there's somebody who's studying this.
There are a lot of people who study this. It's a field that, over the past 20 or so years, I'd say, medieval feminist scholarship has been conducted, and much more recently there's been a real push, an important push, for it to be intersectional and inclusive, and we're uncovering things that have been hiding in plain sight for 1,500 years, and it's dynamic and it's exciting, and it's causing some waves, it's causing some problems. The medieval period has kind of been adopted by a lot of white supremacist organizations, sort of this idea of the pure master Anglo-Saxon race.
Mm-hmm.
We've known for quite a long time that England was never only white. It was never only Anglo-Saxons, ever. And yet that sort of pervasive myth continues to be deployed in the supporting of white supremacist organizations. And most recently, we've seen a lot of backlash and a lot of attacks on medievalists of color, and on our LGBTQ colleagues, both in the field, both in the profession, and also from outside the profession. And so now is actually a really important, I think, watershed time, and I don't use that term lightly, but an important watershed moment in medieval studies in terms of questions of violence, race, gender, ethnicity, brutality, these kinds of questions. It's really, now more than ever, I think, important. Yeah.
It's very interesting that you say this, because what has been hidden in plain sight and how it's being uncovered with what you're sharing also makes me wonder, with the scenarios that we're seeing as far as mass violence in our society. We're seeing things like an active shooter, but if you were to take that scenario to medieval, we don't have that type, but it would be applicable in a different type of scenario. And I'm wondering if, to look in those times, if there was a way it was addressed in resolution, if there was a way that we could apply that now in resolving something on a wide scale.
You just kind of summed up my dissertation. That's being turned into a book. I was looking specifically at instances of violence at the feast, because there's ever since Quentin Tarantino, whom I love, brilliant, right? But ever since Pulp Fiction, getting medieval on your ass has been a thing. And the idea that the Middle Ages was just this senselessly violent time where everybody was bashing the hell out of everybody else, right? And so a lot of my work is reclamation of medieval violence on its own terms, in its own contexts, trying to understand and situate it in a way where it's not, I mean, when you look at it, it's not senseless, it's not mindless, it's not just happening everywhere. It's being deployed intentionally. It has a function, it has a narrative function and a cultural function, and it's not just added in for effect. Actually, I would argue that modern society is much more susceptible to designing things just to add extra gratuitous violence, because in the Middle Ages, especially in literary violence, it was deployed for purposes, for actual specific functions. And I noticed that violence at the feast is deployed for a variety of functions, but it's almost always, not always, but almost always, either the person throwing the feast implementing violence against the feast goers as a demonstration of their power over them, or if it's a woman, it's in order to get back at. It's retributive violence, or it's preemptive violence. It's intended to stop something that's going to happen. But you know, you think about, for example, in the modern world, when you're throwing a wedding, the seating chart being so important, because you can't sit Uncle David next to Aunt Alice because they'll scream at each other and throw things, right? I mean, we still have this sense that we know that a feast is supposed to be a gathering of community, and everybody knows the part they're supposed to play. Everybody knows how you're supposed to behave. We have these protocols in place. And yet, if somebody makes the intentional choice to disrupt that protocol, they're going to. And a feast is a great place to do that, because it's a place where everyone's gathered. It's a spectacle. It's intended to be a spectacle already. So that what better place to disrupt the narrative and make everybody pay attention to something that they otherwise are willfully ignoring. So in the medieval period, a lot of times you see it used as a form of retributive justice, where the legal system and the codes of conduct and the sort of protocols just they don't work. They're not giving you the justice that you feel like you need. And so that's kind of where I was going. Yeah.
This is just very fascinating to me, because what you have said, I just think patternistically is something we have failed to think about, and how going back and looking at things is so similar to like the stock market. You can see certain things historically, and oftentimes we failed to look back, especially looking back on certain periods and times in sex. Mm-hmm. It's just, how did you get in to finding a passion about medieval things? And yours is not just in one particular area.
It's always, I don't remember a time in my life when I wasn't, I mean, it started with dragons, right? Dragons and unicorns. Oh. And Dragonlance, and, you know, as a child, I was absolutely obsessed with, you know, The Last Unicorn and The Dark Crystal and Legend and Willow and just all of, I mean, I was obsessed, really couldn't get enough. And I remember finding out about Dungeons and Dragons and getting to play some, but not nearly as much as I would have liked to, both because my parents didn't really approve of it, and also because the boys wouldn't let you. Right. Play. So one of the things that I love about the modern world is that girl gamers are being more and more recognized and more acknowledged. They're demanding their place at the table, and these wonderful sort of RPG shows like Critical Role that are opening this space up and saying, no, you have to be inclusive. For me, it's this wonderful synergy between my personal proclivities and passions and things that I love, and my critical scholarship, and the things that I write on the side as creative work. It's kind of all, this is a great moment for me.
Well, it is really, because you get to you get to see a lot that was sort of hindered before. And this is where being a critic or applying criticism can really actually come out into a whole nother spectrum, because you couldn't do that before.
Mm-mm. I mean, you wouldn't talk about race in a course on medieval English literature.
Right.
Why would you? You're teaching medieval English literature, right? And yet, when you read these texts, they are replete with people of other origins and races and ethnicities. It's not a homogenous, it's never been homogenous. It's just been packaged and delivered to us as such. And most of the colleagues that I admire and respect in this field, and the person that I aspire to be as a scholar and as a professor, we're doing that reclamation work. We're saying, look at the text. It's right there in front of you. You can willfully ignore it, but you can't say it's not there. And it's interesting, but we still have colleagues who continue to willfully ignore it. Maybe they'll retire soon.
Well, and if they don't, see, this is where someone who has the skill set that you do and the position that you do, because in addition to all of the publications that you have and the position that you are at, you also serve on a number of different international and national scholarly organizations, right?
Yes.
One of them, I think, is the Celtic Studies Forum.
The Modern Language Association Celtic Studies Forum, which is tasked with making sure that there is representation in sessions for Celtic scholars in the languages and literatures of, Scotland and Ireland and Wales and Cornwall and Manx and the Breton tradition.
And in addition to that, directly in the school system, K to 12.
The Medieval Academy of America, I'm on their K-12 committee, and we're kind of a liaison committee tasked with trying to find ways for, mostly, I think, 9 to 12, but K to 12 generally, to try to find ways for scholars at the college and university level to engage in meaningful ways with our colleagues in the K through 12 system, and to support one another, to promote one another's work, to give them resources and assistance if they're not familiar with certain information or materials, and just to kind of create a more synergistic and more community and collaborative based practice, because we tend, particularly in American education, to kind of be in our silos. Where K through 5 is in their school, and 6 through 8 is in their school, and 9 through 12 is in their school, and the students are taught, or maybe not taught, but they experience education in this very fragmentary way, where you go to English, and then you go to history, and then you go to math, and then you go to science, but there's not that effort to show how these things interact.
I was just going to say connect.
Right. The interdisciplinary, the multidisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity. I mean, I've never been very good at being exceptionally laser focused. When I was an undergraduate, there was a professor on campus, Dr. Barron, who could write, 25 pages on the letter eta in Homer's Iliad. And I remember being just in awe of anyone's ability to be that focused. My work tends to be much more interdisciplinary and comparative because my mind is a free-ranging mind. I like to call it, I'm intellectually promiscuous.
If you don't mind, I'd like to utilize that phrase myself, because I'm with you on this, but I want to support, in addition to what you said about being able to explore and move on, so that those who are kind of in this tunnel and in this square, in this box that doesn't allow us to express those things that kept us down. One of the questions I have, because you're also an associate editor, right, for a very, very prestigious journal, and I'm wondering if being in that position that will also, in addition to the other things that we've mentioned, allow you to have writers that can really help bring out some of the change that has been sort of stifled.
One of my goals as an editor, and when I came on board this it's the Heroic Age, which is a journal of Northwest Atlantic Europe. And when I first approached the board, it was right after, I think it was 2017. It was just after the election. It was when we were starting to see, the fallout from the Charlottesville riot.
Mm.
And in our field, we were experiencing that sort of backlash against feminism, against women, against scholars of color. And I approached the board and I asked them if they would be amenable to the idea of doing a special issue on new feminist voices in the Heroic Age.
Okay.
And they, to their absolute credit, just were immediately, yes, what do you need from us? How do we support this? We have a platform, and yes, you can use our platform. And so when I decided to do that, my instinct is I tend to be a problem solver. I tend to try to fix things. My instinct is to jump in and do something that I can do. And that was really the only thing that I could do. As a scholar writing a book, it would take a year or two to get that book done, and then another 6 months to go through. And it's not just my story to tell. So that wasn't a good way of handling it. But a good way of handling it was making the space for other people who are already doing that work to get in there and do it. And so that's how I got involved with that. And then they were so happy with the work that I was doing with the early career scholars and the feminist scholars that I had amassed for the issue, that they asked me if I would just go ahead and come on and be the associate editor. And one of my editorial sort of the things that I focus on, one of my editorial focuses is trying to locate scholars who have trouble with getting platforms and trying to give them a place that I have available. And so far it seems to be going pretty well. So, I mean, this is new for me. I've only been doing it for about a year.
Well, I really love that.
Almost.
I love that passion. I love being able to help others. And when I hear that somebody else has that same passion, it just touches me, because I really have a belief that we have a purpose here. And when you know that is grounded in helping others,
Mm-hmm.
it really flourishes in the other things that you're doing. So I love to hear that you're doing that. But one of the things you said was that wasn't your story to tell, but you do have a story of your own to tell that will be coming out pretty soon. So let's talk about that.
Okay, yeah, let's do that. So my book is a collection of poems, and it's called Arthurian Things, a collection of poems. And it came out of another interesting kind of all the things came together moment. I have been teaching at Lindenwood University since 2016, and I am their lone medievalist, which means I'm the person who does all of the Chaucer classes and the Arthur classes, and I teach mythology and folklore. And I also teach the senior capstone course, which is senior capstone in English studies. And we recently realigned our curriculum so that we used to have separate tracks for creative writing in English and English ed, and we brought them all together under English studies.
Okay.
So the capstone had to be redesigned to meet the needs of students doing English preparatory for teaching, students doing English literature, and students doing creative writing.
Oh,
and
wow.
Also those who are interested in technical writing and rhetoric composition. So I've always been a writer. I've published quite a lot of scholarship at this point, but I've only published a handful of creative works. And I thought it would be really beneficial to our students if I had that credential, because I had the K through 12 certification credential and I have the literature PhD. But Lindenwood has, the #2 MFA in writing in the country behind Harvard for online programs. So I thought, I'm here and it's a really great program with amazing instructors. And why don't I take advantage of that and give myself those credentials so I'm a better mentor and leader of this class for those students? I did the MFA in writing. And that led to several pieces that I was pretty happy with, one of which I sent to the World of Myth magazine. And they published it. It was a poem. And I was pretty excited. I was like, yeah, I got a little piece published. And I didn't think anything else of it. And then suddenly, out of the blue, David Montoya, he either Facebooked me or tweeted at me. I can't remember which one. And this is great. I'm telling the story, and I still don't remember which one.
Yes.
But he either Facebooked me or tweeted at me, and he was like, are you thinking about doing the open contract challenge? And I said, I have no idea what that is. And he told me, if you've published something in the world of myth, then you are eligible to enter into this prize, and the grand prize is into this contest, and the grand prize is a contract for a book. And I said, well, wow, that's a lot. And I don't know if I have anything, but I'll think about it. And I thought about it. And this was at the time that I was finishing my MFA and I was starting my thesis. And my thesis is a translation, a modern translation of the first and third fits, or sort of books of the Middle English poem Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. So it was a translation and creative project. And I thought, well, I'm working on this and I don't want to do this for an open contract because it wouldn't be ready. But maybe I could do something else with Arthurian things, because I'm thinking about Arthurian things. And so it kind of organically built out of that. So I sent this pitch and I thought, they're going to laugh their asses off and be like, no, thank you. Right. And the pitch was, what if we could look at the Arthurian legend through the eyes of non-human things? Right. That's it. That's all. And I was like, this is a wild idea. They're just going to be like, no, but no. And instead they contacted me and said, hey, you're in the top 20. So send us your first chapter. And I was like, oh, so I have to write this thing.
I love it.
The first problem is, what is a chapter of poetry? How many poems is that? Right. So I told everybody I know who writes poetry. I was like, how many poems would you put in a chapter if you were doing it in a chapter of poetry? It'd be like 10 or 15. And the answer I got across the board was, why do you need a chapter of poetry? Nobody does that. And I said, I can't tell you, it's a secret. Right. So I sent them, I sat down and I kind of rolled around in words for a little while, and I wrote 15 poems, and they were okay. Some of them were better than others. And I thought, it's interesting, and I had a really good time doing it. And I have these poems, so I'll send them in and we'll just see. And I really, really thought that was going to be the end of it, right? Because Arthurian things. Other people are writing these like wonderful fantasy novels and science fiction novels and all these short stories. And I'm sending in poems from the point of view of wishing wells and trees and doors. Right? It just sounds so off the wall. And they got back to me and they said, you're in the top 10. And so now you need to send us a synopsis. So I Googled synopsis for a poetry book. And the answer is that doesn't exist either, because you don't write a synopsis. You send in your whole manuscript when it's ready. So I kind of took a stab at it, and I was like, here's what I think the poems are trying to do. And here's the bigger picture. I essentially took what I would write for a novel and took out all of the plot synopsis and put in like theme ideas. And I sent it in and I was like, this is definitely it. Like, I'm done. It's never going to go through. And then I was in the top 2. And that was when I looked at my husband and I said, I think I could actually win this thing. And also now I have to write a lot all day, every day for like the next few weeks. So it got to where it was pretty hardcore, because I'm writing my thesis and I'm also working on this new book of poems. And so what I ended up doing was I would wake up in the morning and I would have a cup of coffee and I would go for a walk around in circles and just drink the coffee and let my mind do whatever it was going to do, ruminate or wander or free range or hone in on something. And then I would come in and just write whatever was there. Just throw it all on the page. And then I would walk away from it. And then I would come back and try to shape it into something. And that worked really well. But it was 10 to 12 hour days for 3 weeks. And then I was near the end, but I didn't have as much as I needed. And so I went back to my social media family and I said, what kinds of things do you associate with nights that are not the ones that you would already think of? Because I already have the swords and the shields and things. Give me something else. All right. And then they kind of helped me finish it out. And I wound up with a book that I never in a million years expected to write or thought I could write or thought anybody would want to read. And apparently I was wrong on all counts, which is pretty cool.
This is great. So what is the title?
I'm sorry, that was a really long explanation.
I really like this. And I want the audience to be able to obtain a copy. So what's the title of your book? And let's give them the place where they can get in contact with you. So as soon as it's released, they can start following. Well, they can connect with you before that, but they can follow you. They can get a copy of other publications that you have, and there is many, and there is so much fascinating stuff at your website, I've got to tell you. Yes, and then to connect with you also on social media, because if you have any other further things going on that you might need information from your social media family, they can chime in with you on that as well. And the title of your book.
Yes, so the book is Arthurian Things, a collection of poems. It should be out sometime next year in 2020. Whoops, excuse me, drinking tea. And you can connect with me. I have an Instagram that is not kept up nearly to date as it should be, and I'm going to do better. And I have a Twitter account. It's Ridley Elmes. So just the M and then the 2 names on the bottom of the screen. And then my website is mostly for teachers and scholar nerds. You can find some of my creative work at World of Myth magazine. That's the most recent stuff that I've published. And did I hit all of the points? Is there anything I forgot?
Any way that they can get a hold of you is great.
Okay. So Instagram and Twitter.
Perfect. I want to thank you so much for all the information that you have shared with us today. I've had a great time, and I think the audience has been able to open up to another creative part of theirs as well.
Oh, great. Fantastic. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And I want to have you back. So
I would love to
talk about some more things. And I want to thank all of you for tuning in to another episode of Rebecca Sounds Reveille. This was very exciting, and it gives us an opportunity to think about historical things, and one of them being in the area of violence. There's things that oftentimes we miss that can be there, and really, if we take a look at it from a historical vantage point, we might be able to shift and prevent things from happening in the future. So if we can find a way to look at it from a perspective that can actually be fun, like Dr. Elmes has done, then we can really begin to really make an impact in a different way without it being so dark. So do take a look at the things that she's provided, and we are wanting to stay on top of what she's got going. I'm really excited about the show that we've had today. I ask that you share this with your friends, your family, everybody on social media that you know, and those that you don't. Please connect with us on all the social media channels. We'll be looking forward to seeing you there. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.